Did you know that there's actually a formula for success? And like anything else, once you know it, it's super easy. Today, we're talking about how to be successful at anything. I'm Gabby from She Makes It Work, and I get this question a lot. First, we're gonna talk about the 3 key components that make up the formula. Then, I'm gonna explain the formula itself. Yes, there will be some minor arithmetic involved. Third, I'm gonna teach you how to hack the formula to make it work for you. Let's get started. The first component is work. Yes, it sounds super obvious, but we do have to talk about the work itself. And this is what most people focus on. So many of our questions are how to be productive and how to work better, right? Because you know that work is important. So of course it's part of the formula for success. You have to actually do something. However, what we don't talk about enough is that there's the work you do and the quality of that work. And sometimes they're equally important. When we get into the formula, we're gonna talk about how important work is and how important it isn't, because I think sometimes this is what's getting lost in translation for people. If you don't like the work part as much, that's okay. There's ways you can hack the formula where even if work is super important in your industry, it becomes less important if you can focus on the other things. Which leads me into the second component of the success formula, which is how easy is it to get along with you? Is this the same thing as likability? Because we've talked about likability before. I'm gonna say that likability is one piece of this, but you can be easy to get along with without necessarily being actively likable. Being easy to get along with means that you cause little to no friction with people, meaning people in general find you inoffensive. Transparently, this is the hardest one for me. I may not be super easy to get along with. I'm opinionated, I have a lot of thoughts, and I can be pretty loud about them. But I found a way to make this one work for me. For me, it isn't about getting along with the most people. With a big personality, that's never gonna happen. Instead, what I focused on is making sure that the people who liked me at work cared about me deeply. And that is the secret to most of the things in this formula, is that you can find a way to make it work for you and your particular style. So if you're not easily relatable, or people just don't necessarily get along with you en masse, that's okay. You can still make this work for you. The other thing that I did personally is that I turned out to be super good at client management. So even though I may not be the most relatable person, and I'm certainly not the easiest to get along with, because I was so strong at client management, which does fall in the same category, by the way, it made up for it. And so I tended to be seen as worthwhile. And that is, again, part of how this formula works, is that things balance each other out. The third part of the formula for success is your reputation. And this is the one that I think we don't talk about enough. The reputation is, what do people know about you, right? What are the stories people are telling about you? This is your brand at work. Depending on what industry you're in, this can be easier or harder. So what does that mean? Let's say that you are a service provider of some kind. Let's say that you run a shop or a store or a small business, or let's say you're an esthetician or you do hair. Your brand is actually really easy to know and to manage. In this case, if you do good work, then the brand reputation that you build is based directly on the work that you do, and you can see it directly in the reviews that you get on review systems. It's very easy to see and very easy to interpret. I hope that makes sense. And it's a direct result of the work you do. That is a simple piece of the formula, right? But where it gets more complex is if you work in certain other industries where your brand isn't as obvious to you, and your brand is made up of a lot of things that you don't necessarily hear about yourself. Corporate jobs are like this. You work with a ton of people, tens, dozens, hundreds, sometimes even thousands of people are coming into contact with you. You have less direct control over the stories they tell about you, and you don't often hear the stories about yourself. They're filtered by the time they get to you. So your brand reputation at work is somewhat of a mystery, right? Now, the other things are pretty easier to detect. You know if you're working hard, you know if you're producing work, and you know if that work is of good quality. When it comes to relatability, you can kind of tell if people are getting along with you. You know if you're having friction with people. You know if people tend to get grumpy with you, or if you in turn tend to get grumpy with people. Again, something I'm I'm guilty of. You know if you're likable, you know if you're having friction or not having friction. But your brand reputation in corporate jobs can be pretty mysterious, and so we'll talk more about that as well. So those are the three components of being successful at work, but now let's talk about how they relate to each other and how the formula itself works. First, let's take the work. It's about producing something and making sure it's good quality. If you're in an industry where you're a craftsperson, then the work you do and the quality of that work is critically important, right? Let's say you're a lawyer. You know you have to be super good at being a lawyer. Let's say that you make furniture. You have to be super good at making furniture, and you have to actually make the furniture. Or let's take content creation. Even if you're not a content creator, if you're on YouTube or TikTok at all, you're familiar with what goes into content creation. And I have to say now I am very familiar with it myself. It's in the name. You're a creator. You have to actually create the things. You have to do the work and you have to produce something. And the better you are at the thing that you're making, the better results that you're getting and the more successful you are. Those are directly related success outcomes to the work you're producing. So on a scale of 1 to 5, let's say in certain industries, it's more important that you're higher on that scale. So if you're a content creator, you probably need to be a 4 or a 5 at the work that you do in order to be successful, more or less. Now let's talk about the squishier industries again, where you're not a direct contributor at all times, where it's not like you're in an industry where you have to be the best accountant. That's totally fine. Corporate jobs, again, are often like this, where you have to do work, but the work doesn't solely define your success. And in that case, we focus on work and the techniques around work quite a bit. But I have to say, in the corporate world, or something where you're not necessarily a direct craftsperson, is probably the easiest way to say it. Yeah, the work is only important when you are starting out. And so what happens is you start your career and there's this huge focus on the work you're producing and how good it is. And because we've kind of heard this myth that is going around about the American working system, we believe that hard work is what gets you ahead. And I love that in recent years we've started to be more open that no, it's not just about hard work, and hard work will only get you so far. This is that right here. When you're in a corporate job, you start your career, you know working is important, you know you have to produce, and you know it has to be high quality. But once you get into middle management, that's where it changes. So in middle management, what actually becomes more important is your ability to get along with people and your ability to have a strong brand reputation. And so if you're in this kind of an industry, it's really important to note that the formula for success changes for you as you progress in your career. Now, I said this is about how to be successful at anything, and that is still true. And we'll talk more about that after we get through the formula. So I'm going to use work examples because we mostly talk about work on She Makes It Work. That's kind of what we're about, and they're the easiest to relate to. But this is true of any aspect of your life. It could be relationships, it could be your personal hobbies, anything you're doing, it's the same three things. The work you're doing, how easy you are to get along with, and what is your reputation. So now let's get down to the math part. For each of the three factors, we're gonna say that you can rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5 for each of the three things. Let's talk about who we are organically. I mentioned that I'm not great at being easy to get along with, but I found ways to make up for that. However, that's never gonna get me to a 5 because I'm just not organically good at it. So on a scale of 1 to 5, in terms of how easy I am to get along with, I'm always gonna hover in the 3 plus area, because even though I'm super good at client management, and even though the people who like me really like me, there's enough people I have friction with that I'm just never gonna be a strong 4 or 5 on getting along with people. But that actually isn't the most important thing to me, and it's not the most important thing for my formula for success. When it comes to work, I have always been and always will be a top producer. I produce quite a bit, and I do a really good job at it, and I always have. And that has always been what I've been the most passionate about. So let's use the math of the formula again. I am, let's say, a 5, somewhere between a 4 and a 5 on the work you do scale. But in general, I strive for a 5. I care about it, I'm passionate about it, it's super important to me, and it always has been. On the how well do I get along with people front, At my best, I'm a 3+ because I lean into the things that I'm stronger at, and then I try not to have as much friction as possible. But again, because I'm so passionate about the work, unfortunately that means I do tend to have more friction, and that drags down my getting along with people score. On the brand front, this is where I had to get really intentional. So again, the work part came naturally for me. The relatability or getting along with people, kind of a struggle, but I was able to kind of lift myself out of the 1 and 2 arena into a strong 3 by leaning into the things I was actually good at. And then in terms of the brand reputation, I had to realize that my reputation was being impacted more by the stories of the friction than by the stories of the work, and that I needed to intervene in that. So what's the formula itself? You add up your scores on these 3 areas. And I'm gonna say, if you can't tell me right now what your reputation is, you're probably between a 2 and a 3. So keep that in mind. And you add up, where are you on a scale of 1 to 5 for each of these 3 things? Don't get scared. And I'm saying don't get scared because you're gonna be like, oh shoot, my score isn't that great. Your score does not have to be great to be successful. I'm just gonna say that. You don't have to be perfect at anything to be successful, and you certainly don't have to be perfect at everything. I've already admitted I'm not, and I've been pretty successful in my whole career because I know how to play to my strengths, but also I keep my score where it needs to be. So if you add up your 3 scores, you need to be between a 10 and a 12 to be successful. Now let's talk about what success means really quick, because sometimes it does mean different things to different people, and it means different things in different industries. If your personal definition of success is that you have to be the best at something, then yes, of course you need to be a 5 on the work scale. If you want to be the best content creator, you need to be a 5 on the work scale, and you need to be really, really, really strong on the brand scale as well, okay? Now, if your definition of success is most people at work like you and you get rewarded for things, but you don't actually care as much about the work, then you're personally going to want to be stronger on the getting along with people and the brand reputation. You can see that in both of these examples, brand reputation is so much more important than you might have thought. That's why I really wanted to talk about the 3 things that go into the formula, because sometimes the thing that's holding you back or the thing that's propelling you forward aren't what you think they are. And it's really important to know where you are on each individual things and how they add up. So for most jobs, you need to fall between this 10 and a 12 scale to be successful, meaning you can fairly easily get promotions. You may not be recognized all the time, but you're getting recognition sometimes, okay? I think it's also important to know that depending on what your goals are, your relationship to your formula is going to change. So if you are working in corporate America and your goal is to continue progressing, then you need to be aware of what the formula requirements are at each of those levels. So let's stay in this 10 to 12 range. You could be a solid 3.5 across all 3 things, and that puts you a little bit over a 10. You could be a 2 at something and be 5s at the other 2 things, and you're still hitting a 12. So I really want you to think about it in that context, because I think a lot of people think, I'm not good at this really important thing Gabby's talking about. Does that mean I can never be successful? No. That's literally the opposite of what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you can continue to suck at something as long as you're really strong at the other 2 things. I find that really helpful, to be honest, because again, let me just say for myself, I'm never gonna be good at getting along with people in general. And I know people, I have actual real life friends, I swear I do, even though I'm not good at getting along with people, who aren't necessarily great at the work part, but they're really good at getting along and they're really good at managing their brand. And so they're a solid 11 or 12 on this formula, and they keep getting regularly promoted, and they're going to keep getting regularly promoted. Now let's go back to the middle management thing that I mentioned really quick. When you move into middle management, and this is why I'm just going to be brutally honest right now, I am not meant for middle management. This sucked for me, because what happens is you go into middle management and suddenly it's super important for you to be good at getting along with people in branding, and your work barely matters anymore. Like barely. But you have to get more and more good at the 2 things that I think are the hardest. Now, if you know how to manage your brand, it's not that hard, but if you're bad at relating to people, it's harder to manage your reputation. I'm just gonna say that. You have to be super, super, super intentional about it, and I did have to be super intentional about it. But it's not just your own work. Once you get to middle management, as you start rising through middle management, director, senior director, you're growing the leaders underneath you. But if your personal values revolve around the work, then what happens is, and this is what happened in my case, I started looking at the work quality at the people under me, even if they were at the management level, when really that wasn't as important for them anymore. But it's such a core value of mine that I can't help holding people to that standard, especially if that is part of your success metrics at work. Think about who you really are and what really matters to you. Because for some people, their core values really do revolve around getting along with people, and they're great at middle management. They are. These are the people that are actually the best at middle management, but they're never going to be senior executives. And the reason is that while you're in that middle management space, the focus of the success formula shifts to these two pillars and away from the work. And while you do need to hold some people accountable for the work, that's not the most important thing anymore, and that does impact your likability if you do it too much. I'm gonna say that's what I'm guilty of. But in order to be an executive, you have to care about the mission again. And so once you're at the executive level, it shifts again. And I'm talking about standard, typical corporate America. People who get to the executive level need to get there pretty quickly, because for a lot of them, likability isn't necessarily their strong suit, but they have to fake it through middle management. So they need to move quickly through middle management so that they can get to the layer where it goes back to brand reputation and the work again being super important. So do you see this shift that I'm talking about? Early career, it's very much about work and likability. Middle management is about likability and branding. Being an executive is again about work, because you have to be focused on the mission and the strategy as an executive and your brand reputation. That part may still not quite make sense. Gabby, how do you influence your brand reputation? How do you know what it is? So I'm gonna give you an example. When you look at any executive that you know and you talk to them, or you see how they talk about themselves, maybe you don't have direct exposure, but you see executives talking, they give TED Talks, or there are certain public figures that you're aware of, like Steve Jobs or Brené Brown, for example. You know things about them, even though you've never worked directly with them, because of their reputation. And so you look at Steve Jobs, and he had a reputation, and this is where it's really gonna click for you, for being a really, really, really tough boss. He was not likable, relatable, or easy to get along with, but he was excellent at what he did. And he was great at holding a standard of excellence that took his company to the top. And he was good at branding. He was good at making sure that people knew he was good at excellence, and he was good at making sure people knew that excellence mattered. Those were his brand stories. And then if you look at Brené Brown, she focuses so much on behavioral research, and she's built this entire career about being basically a behavioral research scientist, but then teaching people how to draw out the best in themselves, how to be brave, how to be strong leaders. And when she talks about herself, think about what she says. She tells stories. And so the way that you start to control your brand reputation is through storytelling. This is a very difficult skill to master. And so if you look at our channel, She Makes It Work, my whole mission here is to give my audience all the skills that they need and talk about the things that people don't talk about, like this formula. And I've made tons and tons of videos already giving you specific tips on how to do things that fall within one of these three categories. And a lot of times it's in the work category, because that is what I'm most passionate about. It really is. But it's also the easiest thing to talk about. It's so much harder to teach people how to get along with people, especially if I'm not particularly good at it myself. But I will talk about the things that I've done to master that, right? Branding is equally hard to talk about, because this one's very nebulous and very complicated, but you can do it. And I did have to learn how to start controlling the stories that were told about me, because if you think about what I said I'm good at and not good at, I needed to make sure people were telling the stories that made me sound the best and that would continue my forward progress in my career, and somehow shut down the stories that didn't show me at my best and sometimes showed me at my worst. This is very effective. So if you want to learn more about productivity, I've got a productivity video out there. If you want to know more about work tips and leadership skills, that's mostly what we talk about here, right? If you want to learn more about getting along with people, I would have to say maybe find a different YouTuber. Not my strong suit, but the things that I have done to appear better at getting along with people, those I can talk about. And I will. I'm going to start talking more about client management, but right now we're really focused on productivity and in some cases branding, because branding isn't just one or two videos here and there. I ended up making an entire course. I sat down and I was trying to write out videos about branding. It's so intensive, honestly. So I did make a course and there's a full workbook. So if you're interested in, if you're at the point in your career where you're ready to start taking control of your reputation through branding, definitely take a look at my course or even just look at the workbook that's in my Etsy shop. They're both super helpful. So this has been a description of the formula, and I've talked a little bit about how the formula changes as you move through your career, or how the formula is different depending on what industry you're in or what your definition of success is. But now let's reverse it. We're also going to talk about making career choices based on what you're good at now that you know how what you're good at influences the formula. And I already gave an example of that. One of which is, if you're like me and you're super strong at the work part and less good at getting along with people, don't make middle management your goal. I think that if you're really good at working and you can effectively control your brand, which I think is a muscle, by the way. I think very few people are organically good at that. That's one of the other reasons I made a course, is because I think this is something that most people actually have to learn and be taught. It's not as organic or as innate as having a passion for work or having a passion for getting along with people. But if you are kind of in that sweet spot like I am, where creation, work, building, producing, that's what you're good at and that's what you're passionate about, and you can learn the skills to master your brand and branding, then I'm going to say that is actually where people lean towards being an entrepreneur. Because if you're not organically good at getting along with people, corporate life is very, very difficult. It is frankly painful quite a bit of the time. Even if you are still getting ahead, it's not necessarily the funnest experience, because you have to work with a lot of people and your success depends on getting along with them, which if you're not good at it, you're not good at it, right? So I'd say that look towards more independent work. And this is where you can get into freelance work. This is where you can start a business, but you're more directly rewarded for the work that you do if you're your own boss. Because that is something that I personally found really frustrating in the corporate world. Was for so long, I cared so much about the work I was doing, the quality of it, the production of it, the craft that I was honing. But at the end of the day, my work was benefiting other people more than it benefited me in so many ways. And so if that's your passion, you might be better served taking a different route or a more independent route. There's lots of different ways and different types of jobs and industries where you can express your craft in a way that you're the one that benefits from it. You have the most control over it, and you're not faced with the day-to-day friction of not being good at getting along with people. And I recently did a book review on $1 Million Weekend. And so if you're sitting here going, yeah, that is what I want to do. I do want to be more independent. I do want to forge my own career, start a business, or become an entrepreneur in some way, but I don't know what to do. I highly suggest reading $1 Million Weekend, because it will help you with another formula for how to pick what business you can start. Or if you're not even ready for that, I also read Ali Abdaal's Feel Good Productivity. It's not my favorite book because I don't think it's a productivity book, but I do think it's good for people who are trying to figure out what their purpose is and what work they should be doing. So I'm going to recommend that you read that if that's the situation that you're in, because it is good for that. It's not a productivity book, to be honest. This is if you fall in the category where 1 and 3 in the formula are strong for you. I highly recommend just not going the corporate route if that's the case. I learned a lot. I don't regret it. But I do wish I'd started my own business earlier. I think I had the skills I needed a long time ago, and I think that I maybe could have found more fulfillment earlier. But depending on the mix you have of these 3 things we're talking about, let's say that you do like getting along with people. Great, right? Like, you are definitely suited for, frankly, any job where you work with people. And you could be a great event planner, right? Or you can just go into any corporate world and do very well, because you're good at getting along with people. I know so many people who identify themselves as people, and they do super well in the corporate world, and they will keep getting promoted because people know they won't be problematic leaders. They won't be pissing people off all the time. They won't be spawning lawsuits and HR cases because they get along with people. There's nothing wrong with that. Just know that that's your vibe, right? And if you don't care as much about the work itself, know that middle management, and that there's a lot of levels of middle management, that becomes less and less important. If you care about branding quite a bit, then marketing might be a good space to go into, right? And just think about how you can play to your strengths to make this formula make sense for you. And I really say that to give people hope, because even though there's a formula, that doesn't mean there's one right way to be successful. It means that you have to know how these three components relate to each other to figure out where can you be your best self, where can you be most organically successful and be your authentic self and not have to make so many adjustments. Because I will say that after a lifetime in the corporate world, now that I'm independent, I've had to unlearn a lot of bad habits. I've had to learn to take off a lot of masks that I had to wear in order to seem more relatable than I was. And in order to get along with people that frankly I didn't like working with, right? I don't want you to be, at my age, almost 50, in that spot. I want you to be taking control of this now. And there's tons of resources out there. But I thought it was really important to take this video and take this particular moment to take a step up and talk about success at a higher level. Before we get into future videos where we dive back down into the weeds and the details on how to be successful at some of the tactical components of it, which again are the parts that are fun for me. So this is much of a higher level video, but a lot of this is prompted because people ask, what can I do to be successful in life? What do I need to be doing to build a successful life? And so I used work examples, and I'm just gonna say it again, but this is translatable to your whole life. This is translatable to your family planning, to being a successful partner in a relationship, to being a successful member of a community, because a lot of people, especially who fall in that getting along with people category, really care about community building and being part of a community. This could be working in a church, fellowshipping. It could be building ministries. I have a really close friend who cares so much about building ministries, and it's because she cares about doing the work and she cares about getting along with people. She cares about the first two. And so ministry is her calling. So think about that and just really think about what's important to you, what matters to you, and what you're good at, and try and find a way to craft a life where you're living your purpose, whatever it is, where you can be a good partner because you're putting the work into your relationship, because you're getting along well with your partner and you found a partner where it's easy to get along with them, where your partner values your brand. They see you for who you are and they like who you are, and you do the same thing in return. So these three components, this really is the formula for success for anything you want to do in life. So I hope you use this information well and think about what you need to do to hit the right formula number to be successful at whatever it is that's important to you. Because I think that this is how we find true happiness in our lives, is knowing what matters to us and finding a way to live that purpose and to do it well. In a future video, I think I'm going to talk about how this formula applies to businesses. It's the same formula, just in a different font. And so I think I'll do a video on that in the next couple of months because I think that'll actually be a fun topic. And in the meantime, definitely check out the resources I mentioned, because that's the whole point of what I'm doing, is to help demystify all of this and to help make sure you're not doing all this on hard mode by giving you all the tips and the tools that you need. Check out my Etsy shop for productivity tools. I'm starting my productivity series on December 1st, where we're going to be doing lives and we talk about goal setting and accountability together every week. It's going to be super fun. And then check out my branding course, where I really talk you through the branding process, including how to know what you need to know about what people think about you now. And then at some point I will talk about the harder stuff, at least for me, which was how to be relatable even if you're not organically likable and you don't tend to get along with everybody. All right, everybody, thank you for spending time with me. I hope this video was good for you. If you found it valuable, you know what to do with clicking like and subscribe. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. If you're looking for more ways to support the channel, I did also recently launch a Patreon. I'll put the link below if you're interested in looking into that. And I can't wait to spend more time with you. And I also want to hear your stories about how you're applying the formula for success in your own lives. I'll see you soon.